a lot of the primaries that we've been seeing in recent weeks and today on the Republican side, it's basically between the far right and the really, really far right. It's not the classic moderates or centrists and ideologues at all. So, but it is. You took the words out of my mouth a minute ago when you said none of the squad have ever, have had any real problems before. This is the first one, but pulling a fire alarm in the Capitol building. I mean, when you look at it's like, wait a minute, that kind of crystallizes behavior in the minds of voters where, the members can get away with a lot, but there are limits to it. And I suspect that Congressman Bowman may have hit his limit.
Yeah, the infamous fire alarm incident, of course, was during the government shutdown fight in the fall. He was trying to make it to a vote. He maintained that he thought he could exit through the door that ultimately triggered the fire alarm. It was quite a saga. So considering the potential flaw, and that being one of this candidate, Charlie, should we be looking at this primary race in New York as idiosyncratic, as something unique to these candidates and specific issues, or something that could be a tell on the division we are seeing in the Democratic Party over the Israel issue, something that could translate into November?
Well, it's a little bit of a tell, but frankly, we're not seeing it as quite this big a deal in other primaries yet. I mean, it may get there, but so far we haven't. And I think AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, they're picking their shots very carefully and sort of rifle shot going after specific members that they feel like they have a good shot of taking out. As opposed to, being seen as a paper tiger going after lots of people and not succeeding in many or any of them. And so I think it shows some sharp targeting on the part of AIPAC to concentrate their fire on where they seem to have a really, really good chance and not places where, it'd be a long shot.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Charlie. AIPAC's Super PAC has dumped almost $15 million into ads against Congressman Bowman. That is an all-time record in American political history. With that said, maybe this is the new normal, but what would this race look like without AIPAC's money?
It would still probably be pretty close, but let's remind ourselves, This is the New York City media market. This isn't Dubuque. So if you're trying to get through to voters, it's going to be awfully pricey these days. Although, granted, television isn't as big an advertising vehicle as it used to be. But they were playing. AIPAC was playing for keeps here. No question about it. But for future, a member's going to think, geez, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote, but I remember what happened to Bowman. And I sure wouldn't want to be Bowman. And, that can affect behavior. A lot of times members of Congress will look for the path of least resistance. And this clearly was not it for Bowman.
Charlie, of course, it's not just New York that has a primary today. There's also primaries in Colorado as well as in Utah. And Utah specifically, in the congressional races and the Senate race, we're questioning the power of the Trump endorsement. In the gubernatorial primary, Trump didn't endorse, despite the incumbent governor being pretty critical of Trump. Trump hasn't stepped in to advocate for his challenger. How should we be thinking about the nature of the Trump endorsement in this election cycle and how it is different compared to, say, 2022, other cycles before that?
Well, former President Trump was incredibly effective in forcing out the infidels, people that had voted for impeachment of him, and where they either jumped or got pushed out. Pretty effectively. But, looking at these primaries, we're talking about the difference between chocolate and Rocky Road ice cream here. I mean, you're talking, gradations of two, really conservative people, but one of them happened to have Trump's endorsement, but the other one can hardly be portrayed as anti-Trump. So, I think there are limits to how far I'd want to extrapolate some of these things. And the same thing in that Virginia race that we had last week that's still undetermined with Congressman Good. We're talking about some really conservative people here. This isn't, this isn't between the Mitt Romney center right and Trumpies. This is between flavors of really conservative people.
All right, you went there, Charlie. So what about Bob Good and John McGuire? A race now. This election is a week old. It was last Tuesday in Virginia. This is the head of the Freedom Caucus, Bob Good. And we talked a lot about this, the strange bedfellows that came together to oppose Bob Good. Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy swinging together along with establishment Republicans on Capitol Hill. It's still not called. In fact, Bob Good, who thought he was going to get a recount, looks like they will not be within the margin. And John McGuire's margin is actually, he's picked up a couple of votes. He's at 373. But Charlie, Bob Good says he's not done. And he said yesterday he will try to block certification of this vote because of irregularities in Lynchburg. Is this the beginning of the whole rigged conversation going into November?
I kind of doubt it. The thing is, with elections like this, the big jumps in numbers typically come in the first 24, 48 hours, where somebody, made an arithmetic error totaling up columns. You don't generally see big time switches, shifts in votes, this far away from an election. So my guess is that Good's defeat is probably going to stand, and that, when one really conservative Republican is saying that another really conservative Republican stole an election, that just doesn't quite get the traction that some of the charges that former President Trump has leveled over the years. And although frankly, there's very, very, very little. I mean, this country, we have a lot of problems, and there are lots of things that government doesn't do well. We actually count votes pretty well, and there's not enough voter fraud to even laugh at, anymore. But if people want to believe it, they'll believe it.
Well, and certainly Donald Trump is still out there talking about it in the case of the 2020 election. And Charlie, on that note, we have been talking endlessly about Donald Trump and the debate that is upcoming of him versus Joe Biden on Thursday on CNN. The question is, what does the debate actually change, if anything? How much potential does it have to change an election that we all know is likely to be very, very close, in which many voters on either side for either candidate are already entrenched and have their minds made up?
Well, debates typically don't make that much difference. I mean, the typical normal, well-adjusted person does not spend an hour and a half out of their lives watching a political debate. It's usually partisans that are watching to cheer on, their favored candidate or jeer the opposition. But occasionally they do. And this is obviously a close race, but I would look for, rather than, and I was a high school debater, rather than think like, okay, who was smoother, who performed better, I'd say, who got a moment? Who had a moment, something happened, positive or negative, that people will be talking about at work or in the grocery store aisle or over the back fence a day or 2, 3 days ago, where it's gone viral, where it's covered, played over and over and over again. And we can all think of cases where that's happened, but most debates don't move the needle much at all. And the little 8 or 10% of people that are really, really, really undecided, they don't read, watch, listen to news. They're not Bloomberg watchers. These people are kind of pretty much out, and they only check in late if they check in at all. But they're not debate watchers. They really aren't.